everyone to the second Violent Crime Intervention Fund informational webinar. My name is Jessica Cleveland. I am Assistant Director of Special Projects at the Office of Criminal Justice Programs. I appreciate you joining us today and really look forward to answering any questions that you have and helping you all learn more about this fund source that is now open. So there are a couple of goals for today's webinar. The first is, of course, to understand the purpose of the VCIF funds. So broadly, it's to implement evidence-based programming, technology, and strategies to address and reduce violent crime in your local communities. There are two different grant fund sources that are being treated as two separate grants that you have the opportunity to apply for. We're going to go into that in much more detail later, but one is the formula grant, which establishes a set allocation to each law enforcement agency. I'll tell you how to find out what that amount is. And then the second fund source is for competitive enhancement grants. And that one has a cap of $2 million. And that is intended to support collaborations of multiple law enforcement agencies in a region. And we'll talk about some of the really concrete ways that that can be applied. Another goal of today is to help you understand how to access all of this information as you're working with your teams to craft your application. So I'll show you where to find the application packet. I'll show you how to find our website. You see it listed right there, tn.gov/crimefund. I'll show you what that looks like and where to go once you get on that website. And I'll also tell you several times throughout this webinar how to get in touch with our technical assistance provider for this application and for this project, which is the UT Institute for Public Service. So I'll show you how to get in touch with them and what sorts of things to reach out to them about. We also want you to understand what types of projects and expenses are allowed with these funds, as well as what sorts of expenses are not allowed with these funds. So broadly, we want to support, equipment, technology, and staff. We want to support coordinated projects that collaborate with community partners to address violent crime, as well as any training or technical assistance needs that you have. And finally, we want to give you the deadlines and the sort of application requirements and deliverables so that you can plan for the next couple of months in how you and your team are going to apply for these funds. So you'll see these dates again, but there is a pretty short web-based form called the Intent to Apply. That is due on December 15th. Again, I'll tell you exactly where to find it and how to fill it out. And then the actual application deadline, so when to have your entire application packet in, that is January 16th. So to give you a little bit of background about how we came to this point, the Violent Crime Intervention Fund, it's pretty broad. It is to support local law enforcement agencies in addressing violent crime in your communities. So we did a lot of work to hear from you all, to hear from law enforcement leadership across the state over the last several months. We held 3 law enforcement roundtables with chiefs and sheriffs. Several of you were probably part of those virtual roundtables. We also worked closely with the Tennessee Association of Chiefs of Police and the Tennessee Sheriff's Association, as well as the Department of Safety and the Department of Commerce and Insurance. We did that to, first of all, ask, what sorts of violent crime are various communities and law enforcement agencies seeing in their communities? What does violent crime look like all across Tennessee? And what we found is that it looks really different depending on where you live. In some parts of the state, it looks like gang violence. And in other parts of the state, it looks like interpersonal violence. We saw the smaller and mid-level jurisdictions, a lot of the more dangerous calls and the more recurring violent crime that they were seeing was interpersonal violence, assault, aggravated assault, things like that. So we really saw that we needed to have, a program that responded well to all of those different needs so that communities could tell us, what they needed in order to address those various types of crime. We also know that, of course, Tennessee has a very unique geography, which means that, we heard from sort of mid-level communities that were connected to larger communities by virtue of the interstate system, that they were seeing violent crime incidents that weren't being committed by their own citizens. It was just by virtue of their proximity to a bigger city. Things like firearm crime, vehicle theft, a lot of youth crime was sort of bleeding over and out from larger cities and really seriously affecting mid-level law enforcement agencies that just do not have the capacity to address that type of crime, that type of volume. And so the competitive collaborative enhancement grant, which is the one that has the $2 million cap over 3 years, that is really meant to sort of get at some of those regional needs that we heard so much of during those roundtables. So the idea is for law enforcement agencies to partner with other law enforcement agencies. So multi-jurisdictional collaborations that are, codified by virtue of memoranda of understanding to say, look, we want to implement a strategy to address some of this, but we're going to need some support in terms of equipment, in terms of training, in terms of manpower to bridge those gaps and sort of address some of those regional issues that we're seeing. And so we hope that the competitive enhancement grant has will be able to satisfy some of those needs. And we'll talk more about that. So you're going to see this multiple times, but I want everyone on this webinar to please take note that we have a special website for everything you need to know about this grant. If you have not already visited this website and clicked around and looked at the resources that we have up there, if you've not already downloaded the application packet, I encourage you to do that this afternoon if you're able to. I encourage you to forward this to other folks on your team. If you have folks who do grant writing, if you have folks who do project design, if you have folks who are experts in your agency in violent crime issues, let them start thinking about it and looking at this. This smart code that's up here, you can pull your phone out right now and take a picture of that, and it will take you to the website. It has a lot of really helpful information that we are going to just continue to keep updating, not just through the application period, but all the way through the life of this project to help and support you all as you continue to do this work. But I want to point you now to a certain place on the website, which is when you go to crime fund, to tn.gov/crime fund, you'll scroll down a little bit and you will see this click here to apply for funds in the middle of the screen. If you click on that, that is going to give you the application packet. It's a PDF. It has everything you need to apply for this grant. It has all of the information. It has the deadlines. It has the links to the documents that you're going to need to fill out, you and your team. Those documents include the scope, which is a document that has questions that takes you through the planning of your project design and asks you to sort of lay out how you plan to implement the project, what all you're going to purchase, how that particular strategy, relates to violent crime. And I'll show it to you in just a minute. It's also going to have links to the budget templates, which are Excel documents that breaks out exactly how you're going to spend the money. So if you have not already, please go to the website, scroll down a little, find this click here to apply for funds button, and check out that PDF. Forward it to someone else on your team if they need to read through it first, but please go ahead and start sharing that with your team, read it carefully. Also, throughout that packet is that same contact information to reach out to OCJP and to reach out to UT LEIC for technical assistance, for questions. If you're not sure whether something fits into this project, if you are thinking through a strategy, but you need to talk it through with someone, UT is really the resource for that. But we can point you in that right direction. And then, as I mentioned, there will continue to be, even after the application period of this is over, even after folks have their grants in place and are doing the work, we're going to continue to update this website with best practice models, with tips, with all sorts of resources to inform the work that you are doing. So let's talk a little bit about the two different applications that you have the opportunity to apply for. So you should really think of this as two separate funding streams. They are two separate applications. In fact, when it's time for you to sit down and submit your intent to apply form, if you plan to apply to to both the formula and the competitive, you're going to submit two intent to apply forms even. So the first is the sort of baseline. Everyone, we hope, will apply for the formula. We used averages of reported crime, violent crime data to create the funding formula plan and allocate a certain maximum amount of money that each law enforcement agency can apply for. It says here, the funding formula plan can be found on page 4 of the application packet. In the application packet, it's a link. So if you go to page 4 of that application and you click on that link, it's going to bring up the funding formula plan that lists every law enforcement agency in alphabetical order. You can find your agency and see how much you have been allocated. If your agency has been allocated, say, $200,000, that means you have that $200,000 over the rest of fiscal year 23, all of fiscal year 24, and all of fiscal year 25. So it's 200,000 over, two fiscal years and change, basically, since we're halfway through fiscal year 23 at this point. If you have questions about that, the sort of technicalities of it, please email the OCJP email address, which I'll give you about 10 times before this webinar is over. But that formula application, that's intended to support your local community as soon as possible in addressing the violent crime that you are seeing in your community. We really hope that all of you will apply for that formula grant. There is also a second grant opportunity. That is the competitive collaborative enhancement. That one is a little bit different. We encourage, if you have a strong strategy, we encourage you to apply for that. The sort of minimum requirement to be eligible for the competitive collaborative enhancement grant is that it has to involve a partnership between at least 2 law enforcement agencies. So as I mentioned before, we did our roundtables and we met with you all across the state earlier in the summertime. We heard over and over again that meaningful collaboration between jurisdictions was really needed. And it was things like radios that can talk to each other, and tracking data systems that can talk to each other, and training that complemented the same kind of training between law enforcement agencies. So the minimum for this is you have to, going into this application, you want to identify at least one other law enforcement agency that you plan to partner with and share some of this money with in order to enact some kind of more regional violent crime strategy. I just want to list, we also, as part of this, so this was more competitive. And so we will make our funding decisions based on how well the project design is described and how well the strategy is is laid out in the application, and evidence-based strategies will receive priority. So that means that if you can point to a study or something that is validated to say, when we do this, we know it is more likely that these good things will happen, then those sorts of projects are going to be given priority in this. And again, this one, the max is $2 million. That's over the 3 fiscal years. So if you apply, in January, the earliest you could get your grant would be March 1st. You would have $2 million to spend for the rest of fiscal year 23, and then all of 24 and all of 25. So it's 2.25 fiscal years that you would have to spread that $2 million over. You don't have to spread it evenly. You can decide what you want to do. If you're buying a bunch of equipment on the front end, obviously you're going to spend more money on the front than at the back. If you're hiring folks and getting them trained and onboarded, if you're building some sort of multi-jurisdictional task force, obviously those are going to be expenses on the front end. So it just depends on your project of how you distribute that $2 million across the 3 fiscal years. Just to pause here and let you know, I do have the chat open. I don't see any questions yet. If you think of questions about this as we're running through this, please throw them in the chat, and I'll be happy to try to address those in real time. So I want to get in just a little bit to the scope. Now, I understand that there's lots of folks on. There's over 100 people on this webinar right now. Some of y'all are not going to be the ones that write this application, and this that we're about to talk about is going to feel really granular and really more in the weeds than what you are interested in. For others of you, I imagine this is like why you joined this webinar. This is the piece of information that you really need. So we're going to go into it. Again, this is being recorded, so if you need to go back and review it, you can. And obviously, if you have questions after you download the application packet and look at it, you can always reach out. But I wanted you to see what the scope document actually looks like. So if you go into the application packet, which is again that big where you're going to start, that's your starting place. If you go to page 6, both of the scopes are linked on page 6 of the application packet. If you open it up, this right here is what you will see on page 1 of the formula-based scope. So if you're applying to both the formula grant and the competitive grant, you're going to fill out 2 different scopes as well. Everything is going to be done separately. But I wanted, since hopefully everyone is going to apply for the formula, I wanted you to see what this looks like. So what it is a series of questions broken into different sections. As we review them, after they're submitted, a review team will go over these applications, and each section will be scored. Your job is to just go through and answer each question as best you can. And probably, I would recommend checking this out as soon as possible to see what kinds of information we're asking for, and that can even help you in the planning of your project. You'll see here that you need to present some local crime data. Probably a good idea to go ahead and be getting the person on your team working on that, pulling that together and making sure that that's been vetted and that it's accurate. You want to go ahead and get any MOUs or letters of support in place. So you will go through and work your way through this document, and this will be sort of the crux of your whole application. This coupled with the budget, which breaks down where the money is actually going to go. I circled a couple of things that I want to draw your attention to. One is the formula funding plan. A link can be found in the application packet, but it's also linked in the scope itself. So when you pull up the formula scope, one of the first things you'll probably do is click on that link, the formula funding plan link, to see how much of the formula money your agency has been allocated. So that's where you can find that. This blue link here is to the email address for the technical assistance provider at UT. And then here is the VCIF abstract. So the idea with the abstract, you see here under purpose, we're asking you to state goals. And then we also ask you to state objectives of this project. those are gonna vary depending on the type of project that you're implementing, right? But we're asking you to think through that and to lay out the plan for why you're doing what you're doing, why you're implementing the strategy that you are. The VCIF abstract, which I'll show you in a second, is intended to be used side by side with your scope to help you think through some of those, the goals and then the sort of objectives and then how you're actually going to accomplish that. I'll show you more of that in just a second. The last thing, and I see we have some questions, I'll hit those in just a second as soon as I get done with this slide. The last piece I want to call your attention to here is that you will fill out this scope document and you will also fill out the budget document. As you work through your project design, your plan is going to change here and there. Before you submit it, your final application in January, just please make sure your scope and your budget match each other. If you tell us in your scope that you're going to hire 3 specially trained investigators to, work on certain violent crime issues, make sure you've built their salaries, their benefits, the equipment they're going to need in order to do their job into the budget. Make sure that what you're laying out in your scope, you've thought about how you're going to pay for in the budget. Likewise, if you have something in your budget, like we need $10,000 for training, you need to talk about that in your scope. What kind of training? Why? Why will this type of training help you to address violent crime in your community? So those 2 documents, which together they make up your application, they need to reflect each other. And again, as you're thinking through this, you are not expected to do this alone. We encourage you strongly to reach out to UT LEIC and just ask them questions, let them walk you through sort of thinking through it, and let them help you throughout the process. We got a couple of questions here that I'll go ahead and try to address. So the first question for any of y'all who are calling in and can't see the chat is an armored vehicle used for active shooter rescue barricaded suspects allowable, or is this considered military type equipment, which is, and for those of you who haven't had a chance to read the application packet yet, military type equipment is listed in the list of unallowable costs. So the question is an armored vehicle, does it count as military type equipment, or is it allowable? Jennifer Brinkman, our director, is on, but so if she wants to jump in on this, Jennifer, you're welcome to, as well as we have folks from the Central Procurement Office and Department of Safety. I don't believe that by default an armored vehicle constitutes military type equipment. I think that would be one that falls into the category of you need to demonstrate in your scope how that piece of equipment can be used to address the type of violent crime that you are seeing in your community. And if you are able to do that adequately, then the review team will award that funding. The second question we had is the formula grant is automatic if the application is turned in. It is not automatic. It will still be reviewed and scored. And of course, anything that is built into that formula grant application that is unallowable, that funding will not be awarded. But those are funds that we know that you have a need for. So if you write up your plan to address violent crime in your local community and you tie that to those allocated funds, then you will be awarded those funds. But no, it is not automatic. Those applications will be reviewed and scored, and funding determinations will be made for those as well. Someone asked if UAS technology is eligible for funding. I do not know what UAS technology is. So if we have folks from safety or Rhiannon, if you're on and someone's asked you that question already and you have more context for that, or Jennifer or anyone else wants to jump in, we will come back to that question. The question here, are portable LPRs allowable? So there is a section in the application that specifically addresses LPRs. They have to conform to some standards as established in Tennessee Code Annotated. They have to be approved by the Department of Transportation. My understanding is that portable LPRs generally do not fall into that. Encouraged to read that part of the application packet carefully. And you can reach out to us with additional questions if you have them. But there's pretty detailed guidance on LPRs in the allowables section in the application packet. We have a question here about the statewide dollar amount that is dedicated toward the VCIF competitive collaboration enhancement grants. I believe this round, I don't want to commit to this 100%, but the last amount that I saw was that it was 26 million, I believe. And that is the amount that remained after all of the support for the administration of the grant and for technical assistance of the grant, and then for the formulas allocations. Drones, you would need to, okay, so UAS is drones. That is one that you would need to demonstrate in your scope, how that directly addresses the type of violent crime that you're seeing in your community. So that would depend on the argument that you make in your application. And then a funding determination would be made based on that by the review team. You'll see here that an OCJP staff member, Ben Weinstein, he just threw the language on LPRs in here for your convenience. This is straight from the application packet as well. Okay, and there's a question about tasers. And again, those would need to be, you would need to make an argument in your scope about how those can be used to address and combat violent crime in your community. So you're probably seeing a pattern here, and that's on purpose. We can't speak to every single little piece here. We will say, you know, there is a relatively short list of unallowables. Other than that, the onus is on your agency to make a case for why each cost, not just equipment, but you know, each expense that you plan on building into the project, how it will help, how it all factors into an overall violent crime strategy for your community. Angelie, here you have a pretty specific question about LPRs. I will point you back to the language in the application packet. All right, so we're going to keep moving here. So we were talking about the scope and how, you know, sort of what you can expect when you open it up. Again, I recommend that you check this out well before you're ready to sort of sit down and fill out your application. This can sort of help you to plan your project from the beginning. It can help you to sort of shape how you're thinking about, again, kind of what we were just talking about, how you're going to justify these various requests for equipment and for technology and for staff. So it's a good idea to go ahead and take a look at this as soon as you're able to, so that you can, so that it can help you plan. This is a little bit in the weeds, but I do want to show this to you all. And then again, if you have questions, you can ask those. But, you know, we mentioned here, when you download the scope, there's going to be a link here for the VCIF abstract. The abstract is a tool for you to use to think about goals and objectives, that like a way to sort of craft your project design. So if you so in the application packet, there's a link to this as well. It's on page 7 of the solicitation, which is the application packet. Again, as you just saw, it's also linked there. It's linked in the scope itself. So there's multiple places to find all of these documents to make it as easy as possible for you all. What you'll see is the VCIF project kind of mapped out in various ways. We did that to, you know, knowing that we couldn't anticipate every single type of project you guys were going to think of and every single type of need that you were going to have. But we hoped that giving you some examples would help to sort of move you forward in thinking about how you want to plan your project. So an example here is that if you have an overall goal of improving your community's forensic investigation capabilities, that's the goal, right? Well, that's really broad. There's a bunch of different ways that you can improve your law enforcement agency's forensic investigation capabilities. So some ways that you might go about achieving that goal are the objectives. So you might purchase forensic equipment and technology. You might hire forensic investigators. You might pay for training for your officers to receive training in forensic investigation practices. All of that would be allowable and would be encouraged as part of this project. You might also, update or purchase some equipment. You might hire and train specialized staff, including analysts. So those would be the sort of objectives, right? It's not just we want to improve this. It's how do you want to improve it? Well, we want to hire people. We want to buy these certain things, and we want to train them in this certain way. So then that translates into specific outputs, such as how many people did you hire? What type of equipment did you purchase, and how many of those, pieces of equipment? And then, how many arrests resulted in this new push? So, in another example in the bold, you can sort of follow those through too. If you want to enhance identification of suspects and repeat offenders of violent crime, which is something we heard a lot, then you might partner with a community or a partner in your community or another law enforcement agency to investigate or prosecute certain types of crime. So you might try to just get your arms more wrapped around by coordinating with other partners in order to better investigate these types of crime. You might conduct outreach in the communities where you're seeing these offenses happen on a repeat basis. And then the sort of outputs, the sort of, ground level, like nuts and bolts, things you can count that would come out of that might be the new investigation, the number of new investigations that resulted from the funding, or it might be the number of and type of hotspots that you were able to identify as a result of this work, number of trainings that were provided to law enforcement in order to do this type of work. So this is what you will use. These are just excerpts from the abstract, but as you open up your scope document, you're encouraged to click on that link in the scope to the abstract and look through that and think about how you want to map out the strategy that you are requesting funding for. All right. So how do you actually apply? You're interested, you have a plan, you have folks who are ready to do the work. How do you actually, what are the steps that you follow? So as I've said, first, we want you to go to tennessee.gov/crime fund. That is every piece of information you need can be found at that website. You're going to scroll down and click on that big link that says click here to apply for funds. That's going to get you the application packet. It has all of the information that you need in that packet. You're going to read through that. You're going to give it to your team members who need to read through that. Then hopefully you're going to reach out to UT LEIC to talk to them about your plan, about obstacles that you're seeing, about doubts that you're having, about pieces of the project that you're really excited about gaps where you're not sure you know what you want, but you're not sure how to get there, about questions that you have after reading through the application pieces. We'll hear from them in a minute. They have so many good resources to offer. So hopefully you will reach out to them early as part of this process. And then hopefully you will submit an intent to apply form. It's short, it doesn't take long. If you're going to write for both grants, for the formula and the competitive, you will submit 2 intent to apply forms. One you'll select formula on it, and one you'll select competitive on it. And hopefully you will do that by December 15th. The next step is going to be to complete the scope or scopes if you're applying for both, and to complete the budget documents. There are detailed instructions in the application packet about how to complete the budget. So I encourage you to check that out. And like I said, well, 2 things. If you're applying for the 2 different fund sources, then you will have 2 different scopes, 2 different budgets, each for 3 fiscal years. So think of it as 2 projects. Now, they can complement each other. Those projects can talk to each other. You can put in one scope, we're also writing for this other scope. Here's how this factors in. Like, that's fine. That's totally fine. I think I said on the last webinar, robots aren't going to be reading these applications. People are going to be reading them. So when you're writing them, imagine that you are writing for me, for a person. So you're encouraged to say, we're building this into this application, this supervisor position. They also will have the capacity to supervise, some pieces that are in our competitive application. These things can work together in this way. Like that will really help us to understand how all of this fits together. And then I'll finish this. I see a question from Sunny. I'll hit that in just a second. But to finish going through the list, there is even an application checklist in the application packet. It's on page 8. So I encourage you to use that as a guide as you're making sure you've, dotted all your I's and crossed all your T's, making sure you've gotten everything in. You can email OCJP. That's at info.ocjp@tn.gov, listed here, as well as throughout the application packet. I think it's on the scope. We try to put it everywhere. If you have sort of logistical questions about the application, where do I find the abstract? How much money did my agency get allocated for the formula? If you have questions like that, you can definitely email us and we will be happy to answer those for you. If you have more qualitative type questions like, I'm thinking about implementing this, but I'm not sure how, do you have any advice kinds of questions, that's where UT LEIC as our funded technical assistance provider can really help you sort of dig into those pieces. We can't provide too much of that guidance because it would compromise the integrity of the competitive nature of this application. So we are very lucky to have UT LEIC as the TA provider who can talk through some of the project planning elements of this with you. And then again, the applications are due January 16th. There's a question here that if an agency applies for a major item on the formula grant and the item's not approved, is there any recourse or is funding for the amount of this item lost? I think it would just depend. We don't have a strong sense of how that's going to work. I think for this, because of the volume of applications that we're going to receive and the volume of contracts that we're going to do, if we will not really have the capacity to go back and say, you left, $75,000 on the table because you asked for something that's explicitly unallowable. So what else do you want? I think we are reviewing what you have presented. If you have asked for something that is just unallowable, then you would not get that funding. I don't think we would go back and say, you can't have this on the menu. Would you like to pick something else from the menu? I'm not sure we would have the capacity to do that.
Jesse, this is Jennifer. I'm just going to jump in though. I think that what you're saying is true for the start date of March 1st, but I do think that if agencies wanted to recoup that funding, we could have a later start date for those items.
Okay. So what that means is that you would either be able to get your grant, executed and start the work on time, or you would forego that opportunity in order to sort of go back and forth and think about, and basically make changes after the fact, which would prolong the actual execution of your contract. Thank you, Jennifer. That's helpful. With this volume, it's hard to picture how all of this is going to work in real time. So thank you. I appreciate that guidance.
And to that, I mean, that's part of it. We would take the ones that we were able to fund and get to contract quickly first, and then let those know that had to make changes, but they would come in a different round. So it could be that those contracts wouldn't start until maybe July 1, but that would be how we could make up for that difference there.
Excellent. Thank you. There's a question in the chat that says, when will funding become available or released to agencies? So an important thing to know about OCJP grants is that they are on a reimbursement basis. So you say if your contract is executed effective March 1st, you can spend money March 1st. But each month you you're required to each quarter, but you are allowed to even on a monthly, as frequently as monthly. You would send an invoice to our Office of Business and Finance that says, this month we spent money on this, this, and this, and they would reimburse you for that. So you don't get the cash up front. You don't get this money all at once. You spend this money, according to your timeline and according to your project, you spend it, and then you can invoice for reimbursement on a monthly basis. Okay, so a little bit about UT LEIC. They have they've been an amazing partner so far. They've already spoken with, I think, a lot of you who are on this webinar and who were on the previous webinar. We have contact information here for Rhiannon Jones. She is the program manager at UT LEIC for this project. And so some of the things that they can help with, and then I'll also invite Rhiannon and Rick as well to speak. But some of the things that they can assist your agency with during the application process include things like answering questions about project design. So like we talked about, if you have, a sort of general idea of what you want to do, but you're not sure exactly all the pieces you would need to put into place to get there, Rhiannon and her team can walk you through some of that. They can walk you through sort of the implementation part, kind of, you might need to build in, 3 or 4 months of planning if you're going to have all these different agencies involved, helping you think through kind of how to time that out, as well as how to evaluate the impact of your project after the fact. They even have grant writers on staff as part of this project to help you write portions of your application. So you are strongly encouraged to use them as a resource. We hope that having them available will lower some of the sort of barriers to entry. I know we know that a lot of small and mid-level law enforcement agencies do not have grant writers on staff. This is not something that you all are comfortable with diving into necessarily. This is not the normal work that you do. We hope that having UT LEIC on board to help you sort of every step of the way will encourage you to go for it anyway, and to come to the table and to think through how you might use this money so that so that you can make the best use of it. And then we're excited that, it doesn't stop when the application period is over in January. They are going to be around throughout the life of this project to provide trainings on best practices and successful violent crime intervention models. They are going to provide subject matter experts, so folks who have done this work in a law enforcement capacity in other cities and states who can talk to you about the real considerations and their real lived experience of this. And they will also help us to maintain that toolkit of resources that you'll be able to find on the website. Rhiannon and Rick, if you all want to say a few words and just kind of introduce yourselves, that would be awesome.
All right. Well, hey, everybody. I'm Rhiannon Jones. I'm the program manager at the Law Enforcement Innovation Center. I think I just froze for a second. Rick had to go to Nashville, so he is not on the call any longer. But I just wanted to introduce myself and let you guys know a little bit about how we'll be helping. Jesse went over a lot of it. Really, my involvement in your project will be dictated by by what you need. So if you just have a question, I'm happy to answer your question. If you need proofreading, I'm happy to proofread your grant. If you need somebody to help write the grant, we have people that can do that, including myself. So we are here to help you guys in whatever capacity that you need. If you call and ask a question, that doesn't then obligate you to use us any further. But we are things are picking up. I have a queue of people to assign grant writing to, and I anticipate it getting busier as we get closer to the deadline. So if you are starting to work on it now, I encourage you to reach out now, and that way you're not getting caught in the crunch later on. So, but please, guys, reach out. I'm happy to help you in any way I can, and just let me know what I can do for you.
Thank you so much, Rhiannon. And yeah, she makes 2 good points there, which is reaching out to them doesn't obligate you to to any part of this. I think it's just really helpful to reach out early and get information about the project, and they can help you with that. And then that makes me think also of the intent to apply, which is due in December. That just helps us to sort of gauge interest in the project and anticipate the number of applications that we can expect to receive in January. But submitting an intent doesn't commit you in some way to applying for one or both of the applications. So if you say submit an intent to apply for both the formula and the competitive grants, and then in a month you realize that you're really just going to go for the formula, that's totally fine. There's no penalty or anything like that. So we just encourage you, if you are exploring the topic and you are at this point planning to apply, to submit that intent, because it just helps us to gauge how many folks are actually looking at this and thinking about applying.
And Jesse, I will jump in on the question that is
Thank
in the in the chat for that one there. So you are encouraged to partner with your law enforcement partners that are both federal and state, but for purposes of the collaborative grant, it is local jurisdictions that are the required partners. So of course it strengthens your application when you have federal partners at the table, but it is local so that we are tackling regional crime.
Thank you, Jennifer. So now we will talk briefly about allowable and unallowable expenses. You can find all of this information in the, again, in the application packet. This particular piece is on pages 11 through 14. We do, I believe, have folks from Department of Safety, the Central Procurement Office, and Department of Transportation on. There have already been a lot of questions about the license plate readers. These two pieces here are excerpts from the application packet on page 13 that really gets into the sort of nitty-gritty about some of the equipment purchasing. But if you have additional questions about that, we can answer those. You can also email the info.ocjp email address, and we can address some of those questions. Does anyone from CPO or Department of Safety or TDOT want to throw anything else in at this point, if you all are on? Okay, I'll leave that. If anyone wants to jump in, you're welcome to. Okay, Trey with CPO's office just says he doesn't have anything to add on that end. So thank you, Trey. Appreciate you being here. And then someone did ask in the chat, for those of you who are calling in and maybe can't see the chat, someone asked if there is any match required on this grant. For those of you who aren't as familiar with OCJP grants and state and federal grants in general, there is sometimes a requirement for the agency to put some of their own money on the table, and we call that match. These funds have no match requirement. So you apply for your allocated amount for the formula. You can apply for up to $2 million on the competitive, and there is no percentage of that your agency has to bring as match. So good question on that. And that's specified in the application packet, but it might not be easy to find if you're not familiar with that terminology. So thank you. Good question. So just a few reminders here. Of course, the deadline for the application is January 16th. That is a hard deadline. Several things kick into place after that, including batching the applications, reviewing the applications, and then scoring them on the review team. We try to do that as efficiently as possible so that we can get you all your executed grants as close to March 1st as possible. So you really have to have your application in by January 16th, because sort of the train does not stop moving. We just continue on with the next steps after that deadline. So if you don't make that January 16th deadline, you don't make it onto the review team docket. So and then you can't get your contract executed by March 1st. So definitely mark your calendar. January 16th is the deadline for that. And of course, if you want to submit it earlier than that, you are more than welcome to and encouraged to do that. Local law enforcement agencies are the eligible applicants for this project. If you are with a nonprofit, community-based organization, if you are with some other branch of local government, you are more than welcomed to reach out to your local law enforcement agency and explore ways that you can partner with them. If you are a law enforcement agency, you are very encouraged to partner with other county and city partners, as well as community-based partners. But the agency actually submitting the application and the agency that will receive the grant has to be a local law enforcement agency. You can also subcontract with nonprofits, DTFs, the drug task forces, other task force. I know there's a violent crime task force. So your agency is welcome to subcontract, meaning to have a contract with an entity like that and to even share some of the money in order to implement this project. That's fine. That's encouraged. You would outline all of that in your scope. But those agencies can't be the one to actually apply for the grant. The local law enforcement agency has to be the applicant. As I've said, these are two different funding streams. They are two separate applications. The maximum amount you can apply for the 3 fiscal years for the formula is your allotted formula funding amount that you can find in that document. For the competitive, the maximum amount is $2 million. Again, that's $2 million spread over the remainder of 23 and then fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25. If you have questions, we hope that you do. You can reach out to the UT Law Enforcement Innovation Center, UT-LEIC, and you can also reach out to info.ocjp@tn.gov. If you submit a question to Rhiannon that's really more of an OCJP question, she will refer you to us, or she'll find out the answer and get it to you. If you submit a question to us that's more of a UT question, we will refer you to UT-LEIC. So don't stress too much about which agency or which email address should I send this question to. Just ask your question. We want you to reach out. We want to assist you, and we'll make sure you get to the right place. We have a question about vendors with the LPRs. We can address that offline. We don't anticipate adding vendors at this point, but we can answer your more specific granular question if you want to email that to us. And then for there's a question here about for the competitive, can it be an agency plus a DTF? You can absolutely partner with a DTF. You can subcontract with a DTF and share some of the money. But to be eligible for the competitive collaborative enhancement, it has to be 2 law enforcement agencies at a minimum that are partnering. So that might be a city and a county. It might be 2 counties. And if the DTF wants to be part of that, they can, but they wouldn't satisfy the second law enforcement agency baseline. You would need to bring in at least one other sort of jurisdiction in order to qualify for that competitive. But DTFs are, in as much as you can demonstrate that a partnership with a DTF fits into your violent crime strategy and helps your community or region address violent crime, then they are encouraged as an additional partner for sure. But again, you would want to demonstrate that in your scope, how those pieces fit in there. There's a question that says, if it's a reimbursement grant, we would have to have the funds for cash flow up front, correct? Not really a match, but enough funds on hand to pay salaries and vendors before being reimbursed. That's correct. So again, you can invoice monthly. So you would need enough cash to float a month's worth of the salaries for any positions that you are that you're, purchasing with this grant. And if you have, for instance, like a piece of equipment purchase that you're wanting to do, then you would need enough cash to float that, for until you can invoice and receive reimbursement. And you're encouraged to do that on a monthly basis. But yes, that's correct. And Jimmy, yeah, I understood your question. It has to be 2 local law enforcement agencies. It can't be a local law enforcement and a DTF and fit that eligibility requirement. You'd have to have 2 local law enforcement agencies partnering in order to meet the eligibility for the competitive, and then you can add as a third partner the DTF entity if you would like. I hope that helps. And then there's a question that the Perry County Sheriff's Office has no other LEA to partner with. Is a local state park allowed to be partnered with? I think you would just need to Jennifer, did I hear you chime in for a second?
Oh,
sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and say, for definition of regional might be something that we're getting confused on. So regional can be a jurisdiction, like a judicial district. So it could be multiple counties. It could be, and I'm thinking like Perry County, I guess it could be Perry County and Hickman County. So it's regional can be broader than a county also.
Yes. Yes, and really, it's up to you to think, to tell us about that, right? So, I mean, I could absolutely see an applicant agency saying, "Look, this other law enforcement agency is, a 50-minute drive, but we are the closest stop after you head north out of that jurisdiction. And so we get a ton of spillover in automobile thefts and in gun crime and in trafficking crime, right? And so we're not drawing an imaginary boundary around what is sort of valid in terms of, a regional partner. We want you to tell us what you're seeing and what your needs are. And so that's, I think, one of the good things about the competitive grant is it's pretty open for you to tell us what kinds of crime you're seeing and why it would be helpful for you to partner with this or that agency, even if on paper they're further away. And then there's a question that says, if we get the grant, is there a lot of work after receiving the grant? If so, for how long? So there's an administrative element to to operating a grant. You have to invoice for reimbursement. There will be a reporting requirement. If you have other specific questions, then you can certainly email us. But I'm glad you asked that question, William, because one of the allowable expenses for this grant is to hire someone to help you administer the grant. So if you're saying we just don't have someone in office who really has the capacity to submit monthly invoices and, oversee a new program, and track some of the outputs and handle the reporting, then we encourage you to think about what that would look like and to build the expense of hiring and training someone into the grant itself. And that's absolutely an allowable cost. If it will help you build your capacity to implement this project, then that's an allowable expense. And there's a question here about, is there a list of crimes that is considered violent? Not in terms of, now we did use certain parameters with TIBERS when we were coming up with the funding formula, when the state was assigning the funding formula, but we want you to tell us what sorts of violent crime you are seeing in your community. So like I said at the jump, in some communities, it's going to look very traditionally like gang violence and gun violence. And in other communities, it's going to look like interpersonal violence. And it's going to look like local law enforcement being stretched so thin because they go to the same couple of houses every weekend for a DV call. And it's just a matter of time until someone gets shot, right? I mean, they're statistically one of the most lethal types of calls for officers to go on. So we want you to tell us, what does violent crime look like in your community? And then what are your struggles there in addressing it adequately? And so how can we help? So how can you use this money to help to fill in some of those gaps? a few tips, which these are just things that I want to put in your ear as you are starting to talk to other folks about this project. And then as you continue to work through it, and maybe even are speaking with stakeholders and community members and stuff, and when you get in front of your commissions about this, something to keep in mind and to remind your stakeholders at the local level is that more than likely, based on our experience with these types of projects, your crime stats are going to go up in the short term as a result of implementing any kind of meaningful violent crime strategy in your community. That's because enforcement's going to go up, access is going to go up, coordination is going to go up, people might be more likely to report. So there are any number of reasons that on paper, it looks like there is more crime happening. That is not a measure of failure, that is a measure of success. And we know that as your funder, but we encourage you to think through that and to sort of fold that into your messaging as you're sort of setting expectations for this type of project, especially those big competitive collaborative ones that we're anticipating, that, you know, it might look in the short term like more bad stuff is happening. And that might be because for the first time, a community trusts law enforcement on a different level to actually report more of this stuff. Or it might be that you're coordinating differently, and so you're counting things differently. So just staying in front of that. Again, the law enforcement agency must be the grant applicant and the contract holder. If you want to partner with a DTF or with a local nonprofit, you are very strongly encouraged to do that. But the actual agency that submits the application and the agency that will ultimately hold the executed contract has to be that local law enforcement agency. And then, you know, we just encourage you to think creatively. This is really where, you know, we hope that you'll utilize UTLEIC where you can. But, you know, think creatively and show us what ideas you have for strengthening your interventions in violent crime. We would love to support, you know, what you know works, and we would love to support, you know, what you need. And so really think big and let us know, you know, what questions come up as you're planning through that. And just a tip, if your application, if your project plan is going to require MOUs or letters of support, we recommend you start those conversations now. With the holidays coming up, especially, it takes longer than you might think to get MOUs processed and signed. It may take longer than you think to get letters of support signed and agreed upon by all the parties. So just a tip, go ahead and start working on those things now. Go ahead and have some member of your team at least having those discussions so that you're not scrambling to get a bunch of signatures from people who like are still out, you know, for New Year's and stuff like that. We've seen that sort of stuff before. And you know, as I mentioned in the middle with some of the nitty gritty about the scope and the abstract, just really think about how you're going to track those outputs. So some of you have systems already in place for tracking number of trainings and you know, and arrests and these sort of the stuff you can count. You might already have a system in place to do that. If you don't, or if this is such a new type of project that you're wanting to do that your system doesn't apply to that, just think through, because another allowable expense on this grant is the means to actually track. So if it's a system being, you know, purchased to track your activity, if it's hiring a person, like we said earlier, not only to administer some of the paperwork of the grant, but to also help to just keep track of what is happening and that all of the things are being hit, your trainings are happening, how many attendees are at the trainings. Think about that and try to anticipate the costs that you might need, and you can build those actually into the grant itself and not try to, you know, supplement that from another fund source. And that's it. So again, you know, for like the 10th time, hopefully, you know, if you have a question for us about where to find some part of the application or how to download the scope or how to do the budget, you can definitely send that question via email to info.ocjp@tn.gov. If you have more discussion type questions, if you want to think through the project design, if you just want to bounce some ideas off of someone, and if you get to a point where you're ready to get some assistance in writing the grant, please reach out. And as Rhiannon said, early is better so that you can go ahead and sort of get in line and be getting some of those resources. Please reach out to UT LEIC, to Rhiannon. Her email address and her phone number are listed here. So thank you all so much for dedicating your time to this, not only today on this webinar, but just for your interest in this project in general. This is a huge priority for the state, and we are so excited about the interest that we've seen so far and the great ideas that we've already heard from you all. So thank you very much, and we look forward to hearing from you. Take care.